Close your eyes for a moment and imagine drifting along the ancient Nile. No noise, no hurry, just a small wooden boat, a patient fisherman, and a river that has carried the memories of thousands of years. Tonight, you'll follow his peaceful ritual from sunrise to starlight, and let the timeless calm of the Nile guide you into deep rest. If you're ready to breathe slower, you're exactly where you need to be. Welcome, wanderer, and good evening. Tonight, we drift to the cradle of one of the world's oldest civilizations, the quiet, moonlit waters of the Nile. Here, time moves gently, like the slow breath of the river itself. We'll follow the patient ritual of a humble fisherman, from the first glow of dawn to the soft hush of night, learning the ancient language of stillness along the way. So settle in, breathe deeply, and let your thoughts loosen like ripples on calm water. And if you're new to this peaceful corner of the internet, I'd be honored if you'd subscribe, give this video a gentle like, and join our growing circle of sleepy travelers. When the story ends, calming river music will continue playing, guiding you softly into deep, restorative sleep. The first light of morning stretched over the Nile like a gentle hand, brushing the world awake. Soft hues of amber and rose unfolded across the sky, dissolving the last traces of night. The river received this light the way it had for thousands upon thousands of years, without hurry, as though it whispered to the rising sun, "I have seen you before, old friend." Mist hovered above the water in thin veils, drifting lazily with the early breeze. It curled around patches of reeds, wrapped itself around the small wooden boats tied along the shore, and softened the silhouettes of palm trees standing like ancient guardians on the riverbank. Everything felt suspended between two worlds: the fading night, the arriving day, the hush of stillness, the first stirrings of life. And within this gentle pause, the Nile breathed. Its broad surface was a tapestry of subtle motions, ripples sliding outward from unseen movements. Beneath, tiny circles blooming where insects kissed the water, reflections bending and stretching with the slow currents. It was easy, in moments like this, to imagine that the river had its own heartbeat, slow and deep and patient. A lone ibis lifted from the reeds, its wings slicing the quiet with a whisper. As it glided across the water, it seemed to leave a thread of silver drifting in its wake, a reminder that in the earliest hours, even the simplest movements held a touch of magic. The bird settled farther downstream, but its presence echoed long after, becoming part of the morning's calm tapestry. The Nile's banks began to stir in their own unhurried rhythm. A distant donkey brayed softly. Somewhere, a woman began the familiar scrape of a clay pot against stone. The first smell of baking flatbread drifted faintly through the air. Yet even as human life awakened, the river remained the true conductor of this slow symphony. Its voice was steady, ancient, and beloved. For millennia, the Nile had been more than water. It had been nourishment, road, protector, and storyteller. Pharaohs had built their empires along its path. Farmers had bent over its fertile banks, season after season. Traders, priests, scribes, soldiers' countless feet had pressed its shores, each leaving only fleeting marks before the river smoothed them away. Dynasties had risen and fallen like the river's own ebb and flow. But the Nile endured, steady as breath. This morning was no different. And yet, to anyone who paused long enough to truly see, every dawn on the Nile felt unique and unrepeatable painting crafted in light and mist. A fisherman sat at the edge of a small wooden jetty, his silhouette still and blended with the gentle shadows. He was not the focus of today's story. His own moment would come later. But for now, he was simply part of the river's quiet audience, a lone figure who greeted the morning not with words, but with presence. He watched the slow shifting of the light, listened to the rhythmic tapping of the water against the worn wooden planks, and let his thoughts settle like silt drifting to the riverbed. Across the water, the early sun began to catch the edges of old stone. The remnants of ancient structures stood half-sunken along the bank, softened by time and overtaken by reeds. Some were the remains of small shrines. Others were the bare foundations of old river houses long returned to the earth. These ruins didn't feel abandoned, they felt woven into the present, quiet reminders of human lives carried away by centuries. yet not forgotten. The storyteller's voice enters here, soft and measured, like someone speaking beside a campfire that has settled into embers for millennia. The Nile has been more than a river. It has been a cradle of life, a patient witness to human hopes, griefs, triumphs, and quiet moments like this one. Its waters have carried the weight of generations, and even now, as morning dawns again, the river remembers. The mist thinned and began to rise with the warming air, drifting upward until it melted entirely into the brightening sky. As the veil lifted, the colors of the landscape deepened. The water's surface shifted from twilight blue to shimmering gold. The reeds along the shore began to sway more clearly in the breeze, their feathery tops brushing together like ancient brooms sweeping the morning clean. There was a softness to everything. Nothing sharp, nothing rushed. The world seemed wrapped in a warm linen cloth, the kind woven by patient hands long ago. The river exhaled. The sky brightened. Stillness lingered like a gentle hand resting on the listener's shoulder. In moments like this, time felt less like a line and more like a pulcom, expansive, and holding the reflections of countless mornings before it. One could imagine standing at this very spot 1,000 years ago and seeing nearly the same scene. The mist, the slow current, the palms in silhouette, the bird gliding low across the surface. Empires might rise and fall, but dawn on the Nile remained steadfast. A soft wave lapped against a stone, almost eagerly, as though the river wished to nudge the day fully awake. The sun climbed another inch. Light glittered across the water like scattered beads. The air hummed with the promise of warmth. It was here, in this tranquility, that the story of our fisher would begin, rooted in the gentle rhythms of the river, inseparable from the ancient heartbeat beneath the surface. But before journeying with him, the listener was invited to breathe deeply, to feel the calm settling into their own bones, to let the morning's hush seep into the spaces where tension once lived. The Nile asked for nothing. It simply offered its presence, and in that presence, wrapped in soft light, an ancient quiet. Anyone who drifted through its dawn, whether in body or in imagination, could find themselves beginning to let go, letting go of noise, letting go of heaviness, letting go of the pieces of the world that demanded too much. This was not just a river, it was an invitation to slow, to listen, to be. The sun rose fully above the horizon, its warm glow spreading like a gentle blessing across the water. The Nile shimmered in response, its morning song now complete, and with the day's first golden shimmer, our story slowly, quietly opened its eyes. The river that remembers the Nile, in the full glow of early morning, flowed with a calm that felt almost sentient. Its waters glimmered softly, carrying not only the reflections of palm fronds and drifting clouds, but something deeper, fragments of memory, echoes of lives once lived along its banks. To look upon the river at this hour was to feel the thin veil between past and present loosen, as though time itself sighed and settled beside the listener. For as long as people had walked the valleys of this land, the Nile had shaped their world. It had given them food, fertile soil, pathways for travel, and stories to tell their children. Yet beyond all this, the river held a quieter gift. Memory. A memory not stored in stone inscriptions or royal dynasties, but in the gentle accumulation of moments carried in the slow, persistent current. As the sun warmed the surface, the Nile began to reveal the subtle movement of its ancient layers. Underneath the shimmering gold were darker ribbons of water, deep currents shaped by centuries of floods, droughts, celebrations, and quiet days like this one. It was easy to imagine that the river knew all these memories intimately. It had witnessed them quietly, without judgment, simply holding each one like a smooth pebble at the bottom of its bed. The storyteller's voice enters softly, weaving through the hum of the morning. Civilizations rise when rivers are patient. Empires flourish when waters give more than they take. And along the Nile, humanity learned that life can move gently, steadily, just as the river does. Along the western bank, a cluster of date palms rustled in the breeze. Beneath them lay ground that had been plowed and planted for thousands of seasons. Farmers of ancient Egypt once stood here, waiting for the floodwaters to recede, leaving behind rich, dark soil. Their hands calloused, strong, and full of gratitude had carved the first impressions of human life in this region. One could imagine those early farmers standing much like the fisher of our modern story does now, gazing over the river in silent partnership. Their tools were simple: wooden plows, baskets woven from reeds, seeds gathered with care. But their understanding of the river, that was profound. They knew when the waters would arrive, how high they would rise, and what they would leave in their wake. It was not guesswork. It was a relationship built through generations of quiet observation. Even today, small traces of those ancient rhythms linger. The soil still carries the memory of the annual floods. The pattern of planting still follows an echo of old cycles. The river still swells gently in the seasons it always has, as if honoring the agreements made long ago between humans and water. The breeze shifted, carrying with it the distant sound of a wooden or dipping into the river. Its slow rhythm was timeless, exactly the kind of sound one might have heard in the days of pharaohs. Boats then were carved by hand from local wood, shaped by craftsmen who understood how to let the river guide their design. Their hulls glided along the Nile with a grace that required no hurry, for the river had always taught patience. And in that patience, stories grew. There were stories of fishermen who knew the river's secrets, which waters held certain fish, which bends hid treasures beneath the silt. There were stories of traders traveling from village to village, exchanging baskets of grain for pottery, linen for fish, honey for herbs. There were stories of priests who performed rituals by the riverbank at dawn, offering thanks to the deities who guarded these waters. But not all stories were grand. Many were quiet, like a mother washing clothes at the river's edge while humming a lullaby, or two children racing red boats atop the gentle currents, their laughter scattering like sunlight across the surface. Such moments, small yet cherished, were the true threads woven into the Nile's memory. As the river flowed steadily onward, it passed by patches of land where ancient stone houses once stood. Time had softened these remnants. Some were nothing more than half-buried shapes beneath the reeds. Yet the river remembered. It remembered the footsteps that once crossed those thresholds, the meals shared under their roofs, the fires lit against cool desert nights. The storyteller's voice softened further. Human lives pass swiftly, but the river endures. It carries memories not in words, but in motion, in every ripple, every shimmer, every quiet bend. The listener could almost see it. The river holding these memories, the way the desert holds heat, slowly releasing them and absorbing them again. When the light struck the water just right, it was possible to imagine faint impressions, shadows of old boats, outlines of figures walking along the shore, fragments of voices carried by long-forgotten breezes. This connection between past and present was not haunting. It was comforting, like a warm blanket handed down through generations. The river was a witness, but also a guardian of peace. It did not cling to the past with sadness. It simply acknowledged each moment and let it drift gently into its depths. A group of birds skimmed low over the water, their wings brushing the surface with delicate strokes. Their movement stirred the memories resting below, as though inviting them to rise and greet the morning once more. For a moment, the river shimmered in layered colors: gold above, green beneath, and deep, almost ancient blue at its heart. On the opposite shore, a small cluster of papyrus reeds stood tall, their tips swaying in the growing breeze. In ancient times, scribes harvested these reeds to create the earliest forms of paper. They wrote stories, prayers, and records, some now preserved in museums, others lost to time. But the river remembered even those lost words. It had carried the original reeds that became the first scrolls. It had watched scribes dip ink onto fresh sheets, forming symbols that spoke of gods, kings, and everyday lives. The Nile had always been a library of sorts, except its shelves were made of water, and its volumes written in currents rather than ink. As morning deepened, the sky grew brighter. The river's surface rippled more lively under the light, yet its core remained steady. It continued its ancient journey northward, as it always had, passing through landscapes shaped by its own gentle hands. Somewhere downstream, the modern fisher of our story prepared his net. But here, in this part of the river, the moments still belonged to history, to memory, to the quiet understanding that life was richer when one paused to listen to what the water had to say. And so, the chapter closed much as it opened, with the river flowing calmly, carrying with it the memories of ages long past, and inviting any who watched to feel, if only for a heartbeat, the continuity of existence across time. The Nile did not rush. It did not age. It simply remembered. A fisher's morning ritual, as the sun continued its slow climb above the eastern ridge, painting the Nile in a softer, warmer gold. The fisher of our quiet tale began his morning ritual. It was not a routine rushed by the demands of the day, nor a task completed out of obligation. It was an inheritance one passed down through generations, shaped lovingly by the rhythm of the river itself. His small wooden boat rested against the bank, its hull worn smooth from countless journeys and gentle collisions with drifting reeds. Every groove, every faded patch of paint, held stories of mornings like this, calm, unhurried, and deeply familiar. The boat was a companion, not merely a tool. The fisher stepped onto the boat with practiced ease. The wood creaked beneath his weight, a soft, friendly greeting. He carried a basket of fresh bait, a coiled net, and a small clay jar filled with water. Each item had its place, and each place had been chosen long ago, refined through years of repetition. Before doing anything else, he paused not out of indecision, but out of respect. He stood with one hand on the edge of the boat, looking out toward the shimmering ribbon of water. The river was calm, but he watched it closely, as though greeting an old friend whose mood mattered. It was a quiet exchange, one almost invisible to an untrained eye. Yet it grounded him, as it had grounded his father, and his father before him. The storyteller's voice drifts into the scene like a soft breeze. Every ritual begins with presence, and for those who depend on the Nile, presence is both protection and gratitude. The fisher crouched beside his net. The weaving was old but strong, lined with the patient knots taught to him as a child. Each knot was familiar. His fingers had tied thousands over the years, often while listening to the soft hum of his mother's evening songs. He ran his hands slowly along the net, checking for tears or loose strands. If he found one, he stopped and repaired it not hurriedly, but with steady, intentional motions. The river rewarded those who took their time. He dipped the net into the cool water beside the boat, letting it soak. The ripples fanned outward in gentle rings, blending with the morning's natural pattern. The water wrapped around the net like an embrace, softening the fibers, preparing them for the hours ahead. Next came the bait. He opened a small basket, woven from papyrus reeds gathered from the riverbank. Inside lay carefully selected pieces of small fish, bits of bread, and pieces of river plants that certain species were drawn to. The fisher didn't mind if some of these offerings drifted away into the current. It was part of the exchange. One gives to the river, and the river decides what to return. A heron stood nearby, half submerged at the shallows, watching the fisher's movements with slow, deliberate blinks. The bird had learned that the start of the ritual often meant food might drift its way. The fisher glanced toward it, not shooing it away, simply acknowledging it as another participant in the river's ecosystem. This coexistence was the way of things. Human, bird, fish, reed, they all shared this ancient space without conflict. The fisher's boat rocked ever so slightly as he stepped aboard fully. With a quiet exhale, he settled onto the small wooden seat carved into the middle of the boat. He placed the basket beside him, then reached for the length of rope tied securely to the dock. He untied it in slow, methodical motions, giving the knot the same respect he gave the net. When the rope loosened, the boat drifted an inch away from the wooden post, as though eager to return to its natural element. He tapped the side of the boat with 2 fingers, a gesture passed down from his grandfather. It was not a superstition, but a greeting, a way of saying, "I'm with you now. Carry me gently." He picked up his oar, carved long ago from eucalyptus wood. Its surface was smooth from years of use, shaped not by machine but by careful human hands. He dipped it into the water, with a sound so soft it almost blended into silence. The river accepted the oar without resistance, parting neatly around it as he began to push the boat away from the shore. The movement was slow, steady, unforced. The boat glided forward like a feather drifting in a breeze. The fisher preferred mornings like this, when the wind was light, the water clear, and the world felt unburdened by urgency. As he traveled a little distance from the bank, the sounds of village life faded behind him. The distant conversations of early risers softened. The clinking of clay pots became whispers. Soon, the only sounds were the rhythmic dip of the oar, the gentle tapping of water against the hull, and the soft hum of insects waking in the reeds. The Nile was wide here, but not intimidating. It welcomed him with the warmth of habit. He guided the boat toward a familiar pacha place, where the current slowed just enough to create a natural gathering space for fish. He knew this spot intuitively, not because he had studied maps or charts, but because he had spent hundreds of mornings learning the subtle cues of the river. A slight shift in color, a cluster of reeds bending more sharply, the faintest movement beneath the surface. He recognized these signs, the way others recognize familiar footsteps. He let the boat drift until it settled exactly where he wanted it. Then he anchored it lightly with a stone tied to a rope. The stone sank with a soft plunk, sending tiny ripples outward that sparkled briefly in the sun. Now, the ritual entered its second phase, a quiet, contemplative stillness. The fisher lifted the net, now softened by the water. He held it with care, allowing it to unfold naturally. No sudden movements, no harsh tugs. He breathed slowly, syncing his rhythm with that of the river. One breath in, one breath out, matching the swaying of the boat. He cast the net with a smooth, circular motion. The net spun outward, catching sunlight as it spread across the water before sinking soundlessly beneath the surface. The river accepted it without disturbance, folding it into its depths like a secret entrusted to a friend. The fisher wiped his hands on a simple linen cloth, then rested them on his knees. His posture eased, his shoulders soft. The waiting began. But this waiting was not a void. It was a meditation, a partnership with nature, a returning to the ancient understanding that sometimes the most meaningful moments are the ones where nothing appears to happen. In the silence, the fisher listened. He heard the tiny pops of bubbles rising from beneath the net, the quiet hum of reeds shifting, a distant splash, perhaps a crocodile settling into deeper water, or a fish leaping briefly into the air. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the morning sun warm his eyelids. In this stillness, memories drifted. Fishing with his father, learning patience from his grandfather, listening to stories of how their ancestors fished the same river with nets woven from the same reeds. The Nile connected them all, and so, with a net beneath the water and the world around him in gentle motion, the fisher embraced the quiet beginning of his day. A day shaped not by haste, but by presence. A day that began, as all his days did, with the steady, ancient ritual of the river. Preparing for the patient wait, the fish's small boat drifted gently in the quiet morning current, settling into its chosen place on the wide, shimmering expanse of the Nile. The world around him had grown fully awake now, yet still held on to that early calma the river gifted only to those who rose before the day grew noisy. This moment, poised between movement and stillness, marked the heart of the fisher's ritual, the preparation for the patient wait. Once the net had settled into the depths, the fisher shifted his weight slightly to balance the small vessel. The boat responded with a slow, reassuring sway, as if reminding him that it knew this rhythm just as well as he did. Every plank in its structure had absorbed years of mornings like this, years of gentle rocking, soft echoes of footsteps, and the muffled splash of cast nets. Meeting the surface, he reached for a small cloth bag tucked near his feet. Inside were simple tools, an extra piece of rope, a sharpened hook for repairs, a sliver of beeswax for smoothing rough fibers, and a carved wooden charm passed down from his grandfather. The charm, depicting a fish surrounded by swirling lines of water, wasn't a talisman of luck, but rather a reminder the river provided, but only in its own time. Patience was the true companion of the Nile. The storyteller's voice drifts softly through the scene. Across the centuries, the Nile taught its people the art of waiting, not the restless waiting of worry, but the gentle waiting of trust. The fisher opened the jar of water he'd brought, splashing a small bit along the edge of the boat. It was a gesture so old its origin had blurred with time. His grandfather told him it was done to wake the boat, just as a person might wash their face in the morning sun. Others claimed it was simply to show gratitude to the river. The fisher, never questioned it. Some traditions didn't need explanations, they just needed honoring. He took a slow drink from the jar, letting the cool water settle inside him. The taste was familiar. Clean, earthy, touched faintly by clay. Hydration wasn't merely practical. It grounded him, bringing his mind fully into the present moment. Then he set the jar aside and leaned over the edge of the boat, letting his hand drift into the cool river. The water swirled gently around his fingers, whispering through them with a silky current. Tiny rivulets danced along his skin before slipping away. Each morning he did this, not to test the water's temperature or depth, but to reconnect. The Nile was not simply a workplace. It was a living presence, a quiet companion that required mutual respect. As he lifted his hand, the sunlight caught droplets sliding down his fingers, turning them into small sparks of gold. He watched them fall back into the river, merging seamlessly with the shifting currents. The simplicity of the moment nurtured a deep peace within him. He shifted again, adjusting his seat and the angle of the rope that held the anchor stone. He didn't want the boat to drift too far, but neither did he want it fixed rigidly. A little movement was a natural part of the river's own breathing. The gentle pull of the water guided the boat in soft arcs, barely noticeable unless one sat very still. The fisher rested his elbows on his knees and took a long, steady breath. The air carried the layered scents of the riverbank, the sweetness of wild grasses, the earthy warmth of sun-drenched soil, and the faint mineral smell rising from the water itself. An occasional breeze rustled the papyrus reeds nearby, adding a soft trembling sound that blended seamlessly with the rhythmic lapping of water against the wooden hull. With each inhale, he felt himself settling deeper into the moment. With each exhale, he released any lingering tension. But the insoucianté simply required for fishing it was cultivated, nurtured by mornings like this. He reached down to inspect another coil of rope, rubbing it lightly between his fingers to check the fibers. No frays, no knots that shouldn't be there. It was sturdy and familiar, just as it had been the day before, and the day before that. These quiet checks were truly necessary. Every morning he knew his tools well, but the act of checking brought a sense of order and rhythm to the beginning of his wait. A dragonfly drifted near his shoulder, its gossamer wings glinting like shards of colored glass. It hovered in the warm air, gently tilting from side to side, before resting momentarily on the edge of the boat. The fisher watched it with soft eyes. He admired its stillness and motion, the way it could hover effortlessly, as patient in its own way as he was. When it lifted off again, the sound was barely audible, a soft, shimmering buzz that faded into the distance. He adjusted the shade of the simple cloth draped loosely across his shoulders. The rising sun warmed the nape of his neck, and though the heat would grow stronger later in the day, the current breeze kept the air pleasantly cool for now. He preferred mornings like this, warm enough for comfort, cool enough for clarity of mind. The river around him remained calm, but beneath the surface, life stirred. He could sense small movements, fish shifting in schools, plants swaying gently, unseen creatures gliding through deeper currents. The Nile was a world, layered in sound and silence, motion and stillness, memory and renewal. All these layers shaped the fisherman's experience, guiding his choices subtly but profoundly. The fisher leaned back slightly, letting his hand trail once again through the water. His fingers brushed against floating leaves carried from upstream. Some were from date palms, others drifted from distant groves. The river was a collector of stories, gathering pieces from faraway villages, carrying them downstream, delivering them to new shores. He often wondered what stories the river carried today. Tales of families waking for morning prayers, children running through sandy courtyards, women baking bread in clay ovens, farmers checking their irrigation canals. Life unfolded along the entire length of the Nile each day, and the river was its silent witness. The storyteller's voice flows through the quiet moment. The fisher prepares not with haste, but with presence. For those who live by the river know that success is not the moment the net is lifted, but the hours spent in the company of water, wind, and waiting. The fisher shifted again, now fully settled. Everything was in its place. The net beneath the water, the rope secured, the oar resting quietly at his side, his tools arranged in a familiar pattern. There was nothing left to do but wait. Yet this waiting was not passive. It was an active openness, a listening. He watched the subtle ripples. He studied the patterns of light shifting over the water. He sensed the slight pull of the river against the anchor rope. He observed birds circling overhead, their shadows moving across the surface like soft brushstrokes. Time moved differently out here. Minutes stretched into something softer, more fluid. Thoughts drifted gently, never rushing. Even the sun seemed to rise more slowly when viewed from the quiet cradle of the boat. The fisher inhaled deeply once more, letting the breath settle in his chest. Then he closed his eyes, not to sleep, but to listen more fully. The world around him hummed with gentle life. The distant call of an ibis, the brushing of reeds, the soft splash of a fish breaking the surface somewhere out of sight. This was the heart of the ritual. This was the moment the river welcomed him, and so he allowed himself to sink into it, into the peace, into the rhythm, into the ancient art of waiting that countless fishers before him had practiced beneath the same rising sun. Nature's soft chorus, the fisher settled deeper into his modest wooden seat, the boat held in a gentle cradle by the Nile's calm currents. Around him, the world eased into a quiet harmony, as though the very landscape were drawing a long, soothing breath. The river had entered its softest hour, not quite morning. Not yet midayuan. The air shimmered with a hushed beauty, and the sounds of nature wove together into a chorus meant not for excitement, but for rest. The first notes of this gentle orchestra came from the reeds. Tall, slender, and clustered in elegant groups along the bank. They swayed with the breeze in a slow, rhythmic pattern. Their brushed tips touched and parted like fingertips meeting and drifting away, producing a faint, whispering sound, one so subtle that many would overlook it. But to the fisher, attuned to the delicate voice of the river, it was a familiar comfort, a soft rustle, steady and polite, a quiet shimmer of leaves, a breath-like murmur that seemed to say, "All is well." The voice of the reeds blended seamlessly with the gentle lapping of the water against the sides of the boat. Each small wave arrived like a calm heartbeat, tapping against the hull with a soft, rounded rhythm. Tap, 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 almost like a lullaby made not of melody, but of patience. The wood responded with a muted echo, deep and restful, as though whispering back to the river, "I hear you." High above, the sky remained clear, but a few wisps of cloud drifted lazily across it. These pale strands moved so slowly that it was difficult to tell whether they floated at all. Their shadows occasionally brushed the water, adding a coolness to the shimmering gold below. The breeze carried their faint chill downward, mingling with the warmth rising from the sunlit surface of the Nile. In the distance, an ibis called out its long, resonant note rising like a ribbon through the still air. Then another bird responded, its voice gentler and shorter. These calls did not feel like interruptions. They were threads woven into the day's soft tapestry. Each one drifted over the water, dissolved into the reeds, and joined the quiet pulse of the river. The storyteller's voice settles in like a warm shawl. Nature has a way of speaking without demanding attention. Its whispers are steady, its rhythms patient. And along the Nile, these sounds form a chorus that invites the mind to rest and the spirit to loosen. The fisher listened with his whole body. He had learned to recognize each sound, not in a hurried or analytical way, but as one recognizes the familiar voices of loved ones by presence, by feeling. The river's language was not complicated. It required only openness and a willingness to let the mind grow soft around the edges. A dragonfly zipped across the water, its wings producing a delicate, shimmering buzz. The sound was brief, brightening the air like a small burst of light before it faded again into the hum of the morning. The fisher watched its quick movement with a slight smile. Dragonflies, his father once told him, were children of the river born in water, leaving in air, and always returning to hover above the surface that nurtured them. As the breeze shifted, the reeds bent in a new direction, their soft chorus changing with the movement. The fisherman could tell that the wind came from farther upstream now. It carried with it the faint scent of wild mint that grew along a distant bend in the river. He breathed it in slowly, the coolness settling somewhere deep in his chest. The river always brought gifts, but they came quietly, unwrapped, requiring only attention to be appreciated. On the far bank, a cluster of palm trees stood tall and graceful. Their fronds chattered softly in the wind, an almost playful sound, sharp yet still gentle, like wooden wind chimes swaying in the afternoon shade. Every so often, a dried palm leaf loosened and fell, landing with a soft thud on the sandy bank. Even such a simple sound seemed to respect the river's natural tranquility. Somewhere nearby, a school of fish broke the surface for an instant, creating a series of delicate splashes. The droplets shimmered in the sunlight and disappeared almost as quickly as they appeared, leaving only ripples that traveled outward in perfect circles. The fisher's eyes followed these ripples with quiet appreciation. Their movement was small, but they reflected the larger truth of the river. Even the tiniest shift could send gentle waves through the world. He leaned back slightly, resting one hand along the edge of the boat. Beneath his fingertips, the wood was cool in some places, where minotors shaped by sun and water, polished by years of steady use. Each small texture told a story of mornings spent fishing, of winds pushing the vessel gently across the shallows, of nights when the river glowed silver under the moon. The fisher let his fingers drum lightly against the wood, not enough to disturb the water, just enough to feel the echo. The boat hummed back, a soft vibration moving through the planks like a shared heartbeat. The sound blended with the chorus around him, settling into the background like a familiar note in a favorite song. A few feet away, a small cluster of papyrus stalks swayed in a different rhythm than the reeds, producing a slightly deeper rustling sound. Their movements were less delicate, more grounded, like the murmur of a soft-spoken storyteller. Papyrus had once been the lifeblood of Egyptian scribes, and though the world had changed, the plants still kept their steady place along the water's edge. A bee drifted past, its wings buzzing in a soft, sleepy rhythm. It hovered briefly near a patch of river flowers before continuing on its way. The fisher watched as it zigzagged through the air with purpose, yet without haste. Even this tiny creature seemed to follow the river's example, calm, steady, unhurt. The river's chorus grew fuller as the sun climbed higher. Each sound layered over the next, yet none dominated. The breeze, the reeds, the tapping water, the distant birds. The gentle shifting of insects, all of it formed a living lullaby, a soft, enveloping comfort that wrapped itself around the fisher and anyone who listened with a quiet heart. The storyteller's voice returns. When one sits long enough with nature, the world reveals its gentlest truths. The Nile does not rush. It does not shout. It guides with quiet zones, reminding all who rest along its banks that peace can be found not in silence, but in softness. The fisher inhaled deeply, letting the sounds wash over him like warm sunlight on a cool morning. His breath matched the rhythm of the river, slow and even. He felt himself settling further into the moment, as though the world around him were inviting him to dissolve gently into its harmony. Birdsong drifted through the air once more, softer this time, like a sigh. The boat rocked gently. The net swayed beneath the surface. The chorus continued, patient and ever-present. Nature was singing and the fisher, as always, listened. Stillness, as an ancient teacher, the fisher sat quietly in a small wooden boat, feeling the world around him soften into a deep stillness. It wasn't the kind of silence that felt empty or lonely. It was full of presence, full of breath, full of a calm wisdom that rose from the river like a gentle mist. The Nile had entered one of its quietest moods, a soft lull in the day when everything seemed to pause and listen. Stillness, here, was not an absence. It was a teacher. The fisher adjusted his posture, letting his back straighten and his shoulders relax. The boat rocked slightly, as though acknowledging his shift. Beneath the surface, the net floated peacefully, drifting with the slow currents. Nothing demanded his attention. Nothing rushed him. The river invited him to settle into its patience. He closed his eyes. The warmth of the sun brushed lightly across his eyelids. Shadows of moving reeds played against his skin like fleeting ghosts. The distant cry of a water bird stretched thin and then dissolved. With his eyes closed, every sound felt closer, clearer, as though the world had crept in to sit beside him. A faint breeze stirred the air, carrying with it the scent of warm earth and fresh water. The smell was ancient, older than stories, older than pyramids, older even than the earliest settlements that once rested along these banks. The Nile had smelled much the same thousands of years ago. The fisher liked to imagine that someone long before him Perhaps an ancestor he'd never know by name had breathed in this same scent and found the same peace. The storyteller's voice enters softly, like someone speaking near a candle flame. Stillness is not the absence of life. It is the moment when life becomes clear, when movement slows enough for the heart to settle and the mind to rest. The fisher reflected on this with a gentle ease. He had learned, through many seasons on the water, that stillness was not something one could chase. It arrived only when welcomed. Those who fought it, who fidgeted, who hurried or worried, found themselves restless and frustrated. But those who surrendered, who allowed the river to guide the pace, discovered a quiet that touched the soul. He opened his eyes again, slowly, and let them adjust to the shimmering world around him. The sunlight lay across the water like a sheet of soft gold. Ripples spread in thin, delicate lines, barely noticeable unless one stared long enough. Along the distant bank, palm trees stood unmoving, their shadows long and still on the sand. The fisher let his gaze settle on the horizon where the river bent gently out of sight. The curve was familiar, comforting. He had steered his boat around that bend hundreds of times, yet each time felt subtly different. The light shifted, the wind changed. Birds came and went. Life remained in motion, but the river carried its movement with grace. That was the lesson of the Nile. To move, yet remain unhurt. To flow, yet stay grounded. To carry weight, yet stay gentle. He breathed in deeply, and with each slow inhale, he felt the ancient wisdom of the river passing into him. Generations before him had sat this same way, eyes half closed, hands resting against worn wooden holes, nets drifting below the surface, hearts listening. As the river whispered, his father often told him that stillness wasn't a pause between actions. It was an action itself, an offering of presence, a moment when the world taught without words. When he was a boy, he struggled with this idea. Stillness felt like nothing, like waiting for something else to happen. But now, as a man grown, he understood. In stillness, the river revealed its secrets. He could sense the subtle shifts beneath the water, the gentle tug of the faint movement of fish gathering near shaded patches, the quiet brushing of plants along the riverbed. These sensations weren't loud or dramatic. They were hints, tiny cues that guided his decisions. When to lift the net, when to let it rest longer, when to change positions, when to simply breathe. Stillness sharpened perception without sharpening the mind into effort. It made awareness soft, spacious, and kind. A soft splash drew his attention, something small, perhaps a fish or a turtle, rising briefly before slipping back beneath the surface. The ripples glided outward in widening rings, each one a gentle reminder that even the smallest action created waves. He watched them spread until they faded into the background motion of the river. He thought of his grandfather, a quiet man with wise eyes who rarely spoke on the water. When the fisher was a child, sitting beside him in the boat, Aeon asked, "Why do we sit so long without doing anything?" His grandfather had smiled slowly, the wrinkles around his eyes deepening. "We're not doing nothing," he said. "We're listening." Listening not with ears alone, but with the whole body. Listening to the river's mood, the sky's breath, the wind's direction, the subtle language of the reeds. Listening to the thoughts that settled gently in the mind when given enough space. Listening to the quiet truths that surfaced only in moments of genuine calm. Now, the fisher understood. Fully. Deeply. The river's stillness was not a pause. It was a conversation. He dipped his fingertips back into the water, feeling the coolness wrap around them. The current nudged his hand gently, neither strong nor weak, just steady. He let his fingers drift with it, moving without resistance. The water carried them a little, then released them, then cradled them again. It felt almost like a reminder to remain fluid. The breeze quieted for a moment, leaving the reeds standing perfectly still. The entire world seemed to hold its breath. Even the small birds hopping along the bank paused, tilting their heads as if sensing the shift. The fisher closed his eyes again, letting the stillness enter him fully. Everything, every sound, every scent, every small change in air felt magnified, yet peaceful. This was the core of his craft. Not the net, not the boat, not the bait, but the stillness. The patient, attentive waiting. The willingness to sit with the river until it offered its gifts. The storyteller's voice murmurs gently. Through stillness, ancient people learned the rhythm of life. When to act and when to rest. When to hold on and when to let go. The Nile taught this to its children not with force, but with quiet presence. The fisher opened his eyes once more and inhaled deeply. The world had shifted slightly. The light had grown warmer. A few clouds drifted lazily overhead, and somewhere deep beneath the surface, the net tugged ever so faintly. The moment to lift it had not yet arrived. But the river was beginning to speak, and the fisher still, patient and open listened. The river's hidden movements, the fisher remained seated in the center of his drifting boat, wrapped in the slow warmth of the day and the steady hush of the Nile. The stillness around him had deepened, but it was not empty. Beneath that calm surface, the river was alive with motion, hidden motion, subtle, patient, whispering motion. To anyone watching from the shore, the water might look utterly smooth like polished glass warmed by the sun. But the fisher knew better. The true life of the river moved where the eye rarely wandered. Beneath the golden surface, in the shifting darkness below, a faint tug brushed against the rope connected to his net. Not strong, not urgent, just enough to remind him that the hidden world below was stirring. He did not pull yet. He simply acknowledged the sensation with a small nod, as though bowing gently to the unseen. The river had a way of speaking first through whispers, long before revealing anything clearly. The storyteller's voice drifts into the moment, calm and steady. On the surface, the river is peace, but beneath it lies a quiet dance, one shaped by currents older than memory and creatures whose movements are soft as breath. The fisher leaned slightly over the edge of the boat, his eyes scanning the water with patient attention. The sunlight glimmered, bending into long streaks across the ripples. At times, the light shifted in such a way that he could see deeper down to where shadows gathered and drifted like wandering thoughts. A shimmer here, a dark flicker there. The signs were subtle, but to him, they were readable. Near the bow of the boat, a slow, widening ripple spread across the water. It began as no more than a small circle, barely noticeable against the soft texture of the river's face. But as it widened, its movement revealed a story. Something had passed beneath, moving just close enough to touch the water from below. A fish, perhaps, or a cluster of smaller ones, shifting together in a tight school. Or maybe just a wandering wave from some distant bend of the river. The fisher watched it without expectation. He didn't lean forward in anticipation or grip the rope more tightly. Instead, he allowed the ripple to complete its path, expanding until it blended into the natural movement of the water. The river's hidden dance was not something to grasp at. It was something to witness. A faint swirl of darker water twisted near the left side of the boat. It rotated slowly, like a tiny whirlpool, then dissolved just as gently as it had formed. The fisher's gaze softened. This small swirl told him something he had learned long ago. The undercurrents were shifting. The Nile never moved in straight lines. It carried secret flows beneath the surface, currents that changed throughout the day, influenced by wind, depth, and ancient patterns that refused to be charted on any map. These invisible threads guided the fish. They guided the plants. They guided the river itself. He dipped 2 fingers into the water, feeling its subtle pull. The current tugged gently at his skin, moving at a speed too slight to see, but easy enough to feel. The movement reminded him of someone taking a slow, deliberate breath. He withdrew his hand and watched the droplets fall, catching the sunlight like tiny beads of gold. The river shifted again, this time with a faint murmur beneath the surface. It was almost inaudible, more felt than heard, a deep, rounded sound like distant thunder softened by water. The fisher tilted his head slightly. He knew this vibration well. It was the movement of something larger, perhaps, a catfish drifting lazily along the riverbed, or the slow glide of a Nile perch searching for cool, shaded pockets. He smiled faintly, appreciating how little the river revealed. Only those who learned to listen would ever notice these quiet signs. To most, the Nile looked tranquil and familiar. To those who lived upon it, it was a world layered with secrets. A moment later, the surface of the water flashed, not bright, not startling, just a quick silver flicker, the kind caused by a fish turning its scales toward the sun. The fisher watched it appear and vanish in an instant. A breath of movement, a quiet shimmer, then nothing. But that nothingness held meaning. It meant the fish were grazing near the net, not caught, yet just present. He lowered his gaze again, letting his vision soften until he saw the patterns instead of the details. That was how the river taught him. Not by pointing at the obvious, but by asking him to see the whole picture: the light, the shadow, the movement, the stillness. Another ripple appeared, traveling in a diagonal path rather than a circle. The fisher followed its motion with a slow turn of his head. This one moved differently, more purposeful, more direct. Something beneath the surface was swimming with steady intention. He could not see it, but he recognized the signature of its movement: a larger piece, perhaps moving deeper, testing the currents, searching for food or shade. The net remained motionless for now. The fisher did not reach for it. Patience was still his closest companion. The storyteller's voice returns, soft as a breeze. Beneath calm waters, life continues its quiet work. The river's hidden realm moves with its own wisdom, gentle, ancient, unhurried. Near the stern of the boat, the surface trembled slightly, as though a hand had brushed it from below. The water rose in a small bump, then settled again. The fisher leaned to one side, watching as air bubbles rose from beneath the surface. Small ones at first, then a larger one that drifted upward with slow certainty. When it reached the surface, it burst soundlessly, leaving only a brief sparkle on the water. He exhaled slowly, letting his breath match the pace of the river. The hidden world below was waking fully now, shifting from its early morning drift into its day-long dance. Every small sign told him that the moment to lift the net was slowly approaching, but not yet. Patience. Again, always, patience. A shadow passed beneath the water, long and slow, gliding just past the edge of the boat. He saw it only for a second, a dark shape weaving through the lighter water, like a river spirit drifting on some ancient errand. It could have been a patch of darker sediment stirred by the current, or a fish the size of his forearm, or something larger still. The river never clarified. It only offered glimpses. He watched the shadow fade, feeling a familiar sense of wonder settle into him. No matter how many years he fished here, the hidden realm below always held mysteries, always carried secrets, always kept enough of them to make the river feel eternal. The fisher leaned back again, letting his body soften. He rested his hands loosely around the rope attached to the net, not pulling, not readying himself, just holding it lightly, as one holds the hand of a friend while waiting for something important to unfold. The water around him shifted. The reeds swayed. The hidden movements continued, slow and mysterious. The river was preparing something quiet, something gentle, and the fisher, steady as stone and soft as breath, waited, listening to the unseen dance beneath him. Echoes of old Egypt. The fisher's boat drifted gently in its spot, the quiet weight of the net resting beneath the water, the slow rhythm of the river pulsing underneath. Above the surface, warmth gathered in soft layers, and the breeze moved with a steady, unhurried grace. The world felt peaceful, yet within that peace, the fisher sensed something deeper, an ancient familiarity, as though the river carried not just life, but memory. In the hush of the moment, the Nile felt old, not in a way that evoked decay, but in the way a wise elder feels old. Full of stories, full of echoes, full of a depth that cannot be captured in words. The fisher often thought of this when the day grew quiet. Many centuries had unfolded along these banks. How many footsteps had pressed into this soil before the river washed their traces away? The storyteller's voice enters softly, drifting like incense smoke through the warm air. Along the Nile, the present is never alone. It stands beside the shadows of ages, the echoes of a world built by hands, long returned to dust. The fisher lifted his gaze to the far bank. The sunlight spilled over dunes and low mounds of sand, revealing small shapes half swallowed by the earth. Bits of a stone worn smooth by time peeked through the sand, perhaps once part of a wall or a shrine. Nature had softened their edges, but the river remembered their original forms. He imagined what this place might have looked like in the days of ancient Egypt. Villages built close to the water, the mud brick houses standing side by side like companions in the morning light, children running through narrow alleys, carrying baskets of figs, women kneeling by the riverbank to wash linen, the fabric slapping gently against the stones, farmers preparing their fields after the annual flood, their hands darkened with the richness of the Nile's gift. Just as he fished today, others had fished then, their nets woven from papyrus and palm fibers, their boats carved by hand, their mornings shaped by the same breeze, the same distant cry of birds, the same shimmering light on the water. A soft wave brushed against the boat, bringing him back to the present, but the feeling lingered, that the river carried the past within its depths like layers of silt, each one settling calmly upon the next. The fisher reached into a small leather pouch beside him and pulled out a smooth stone. It was not an ordinary stone. Worn and weathered, it carried faint carvings, barely visible lines etched by hands older than memory. His grandfather had found it years ago, near a shallow bend in the river, and had passed it on to him with quiet reverence. "Someone held this long before I held it," his grandfather had said, "and someday you'll pass it on too." The fisher ran his thumb along the stone now, tracing the faint patterns. They might have been symbols once, perhaps a small offering left at a riverside altar. Perhaps part of a larger sculpture, long broken apart by time. Whatever its origin, the stone grounded him in the continuity of life along the Nile. A soft breeze carried the smell of damp, earth and sun-warmed reeds, blending with another scent-sweet, faint and unmistakably ancient. The river sometimes carried smells from far upstream. Lotus blossoms, crushed papyrus, dust blown from old ruins, even the distant smoke of wood fires from villages that continued ancient traditions. He breathed in slowly. Somewhere in the distance, he could almost hear the rhythmic chanting of workers pulling ropes as they hauled heavy stones for construction. Perhaps for a temple, perhaps for a small shrine, perhaps even for a grand monument meant to touch the heavens. Whether the sounds were real or imagined did not matter. The river made such imaginings natural. He let the vision unfold gently in his mind. A procession of boats gliding along the water-long sleek vessels painted in vibrant colors. Priests dressed in white linen standing at the bow, holding lotus flowers. Farmers waving from the banks. Children splashing water with their bare feet. The Nile had been the great highway of ancient Egypt, connecting villages, cities, and temples in a slow-moving network of life. And through it all, the river always whispered the same truth. All things move. All things change. All things return. A shadow passed overhead a large bird, wings wide, gliding effortlessly through the warm air. Its reflection moved across the surface of the water like a drifting spirit. The fisher watched it disappear into the sky, and he imagined how similar a sight this would have been thousands of years ago. Birds did not change with time. Their patterns remained the same, their silhouettes identical across generations. The river, too, had changed very little. Its shape had shifted, its boundaries expanded or narrowed, but its heart, its steady, ancient pulse remained. The fisher leaned back, resting his hands on the sides of the boat. The wood was warm beneath his palms, warmed by the same sun that once fell upon the stones of Thebes and the sands of Giza. Could almost imagine a small boy mooch like himself in childhood sitting in a similar boat, watching his own father fish in the quiet water. Two children separated by centuries, yet brought together by the same river. He thought of the old stories his grandmother told him, the ones whispered at night beside the soft glow of an oil lamp. Stories of river spirits who guided fishermen home. Stories of crocodiles, believed to carry the soul of Sobek, the protector of the Nile. Stories of gods who watched over the waters. Isis, mother of magic. Hapi, the god of the floods. Osiris, whose body was carried by the river itself. Though he did not worship the gods in the ancient way, he felt their presence in the stories, in the river, in the air. The Nile had a spiritual weight, not tied to any single belief, but to the shared reverence of countless lives. The storyteller's voice flows gently. The river holds memory not only in water, but in spirit. It remembers the hands that shaped it, the prayers spoken along its banks, the footsteps that pressed into its shore. To sit upon the Nile is to sit with all time. The fisherman's eyes softened as he gazed toward the distant horizon. The colors of the day had shifted again, deepening into warmer tones. The water shimmered in hues of gold and bronze. The old echoes seemed to grow clearer, as though the river was lifting its veil just slightly. For a moment, he imagined he could see them figures of the past walking along the bank, their outlines soft and hazy in the morning light. A woman carrying a clay jar, a young boy chasing a goat, a farmer pushing a plow drawn by an ox. Their forms drifted through his imagination with the same gentle fluidity as the river's own motion. The images faded, blending back into the modern world, but the feeling remained that time was not a line here, but a circle, that past and present touched gently, like reeds brushing in the wind. He placed the carved stone back into its pouch, tying the leather cord carefully. The river shifted slightly beneath him, sending a soft ripple across the surface. He exhaled, slow and deep. All around him, the echoes of old Egypt hummed in the quiet, soft, steady, endless. And the fisher, part of this ancient lineage, whether he intended it or not, sat in the heart of those echoes held by the river that remembered everything. A day deep in quiet reflection, the fisherman sat in his boat as the river's warmth deepened, the gentle glow of the sun spreading across the Nile like a slow-moving blessing. The morning had matured into a soft, steady afternoon, and the world around him seemed to hum with a peaceful rhythm. This was the quietest part of the day, a time when activity slowed, when the wind softened, and when the river invited those upon its surface to drift not only across the water but inward into the quiet corners of the mind. The boat rocked faintly with the current, tracing small arcs upon the rippling surface. The fisher shifted slightly, letting his back relax against the worn wooden bench. His breath matched the rhythm of the river, slow, expansive, unhurried. The net beneath the water drifted with a calm certainty, but he did not think of it now. The catch would come when it came. This part of the day was not about fish. It was about presence. The storyteller's voice enters gently, like a soft hand resting on a shoulder. Some days are not measured by what we collect, but by what settles quietly within us. The sunlight danced over the water in shifting patterns, creating what looked like hundreds of tiny stars scattered across the river's surface. They shimmered, faded, and reappeared, as though blinking slowly in greeting. The fisher found himself watching these small dancing lights, letting them occupy his mind with their soothing repetition. Their quiet flickering reminded him that beauty rarely arrives with noise, it reveals itself in moments of stillness. Along the banks, shadows stretched longer now. The reeds cast thin, elegant lines across the sand. A pair of ibis birds stepped delicately through the shallows, their reflections gliding beneath them like ghostly companions. Each movement they made, each careful lift of a leg, each tilt of a long curved beak seemed imbued with purpose, yet unburdened by haste. The fisher admired this. He admired any creature that embodied calm. He let his gaze travel slowly across the landscape. Far in the distance, the faint outline of a mud brick house came into view, partly obscured by the shimmer of rising heat. Tiny specks, people walking, carrying baskets, leading goats, moved slowly across the sandy ground. They were too far to be seen clearly, but their presence was enough to remind him of the world beyond the river as Chantilly Ambrose. Yet here, on the water, the world felt different, softer, wider, more inviting. He inhaled deeply, the air heavy with warmth and dust and river. With his exhale, he felt something inside him loosen the lingering worries he carried in the creases of his mind, the small stresses that clung to his thoughts without permission. They slipped away, dissolving into the river's quiet hum. He thought briefly of his family, his mother, sitting beside a cooling clay pot filled with water drawn from this very river. His younger brother, preparing a small meal at home, humming softly as he worked. His grandfather sitting on the step outside their house, watching the world with the solemn ease of a man who had lived long and learned much. He imagined what they might be doing at this moment, and the thought warmed him. The river sustained them all physically and emotionally. His fishing provided food. His presence brought stories. His time on the water kept him steady. His family understood that this was more than work. This was his place of reflection. Reflection came naturally on the river. The movement of the water mirrored the movement of his thoughts, gentle, steady, layered. He saw memories drifting like leaves along a current. The first time he cast a net alone, the quiet encouragement of his father's hand on his shoulder, the laughter of his brother when they'd both tumbled into the river as children. Each memory felt softened by time, warmed by the sun of recollection, floating easily now, longer sharp or heavy. A small wave bumped lightly against the boat, and the fisher's thoughts shifted again. He watched the ripples spread outward, reminding him that even the smallest movement of water, of life, of heart could travel far beyond its origin. The storyteller's voice returns, slow and gentle. Reflection is not a search for answers, but an invitation to sit with what has shaped us, without judgment, without urgency. The fisher let this truth settle inside him. Life on the river had taught him many things, that waiting was not wasted time, that peace could be found in silence, that even the simplest moments carried their own depth. The river was his teacher, but so were the quiet hours spent in the middle of the day, where the mind could wander softly, unhurried and unrestricted. A small insect landed on the side of the boat, a delicate water strider. It hovered on the surface tension, its tiny legs creating barely visible dimples on the water. The fisher watched it move, amazed by how such a tiny creature could navigate the surface with such ease. Its presence reminded him that the river held worlds within worlds, all coexisting in harmony. The breeze shifted again, becoming warmer, carrying the faint scent of baked clay from distant rooftops. The fisher leaned forward slightly, dragging his hand across the surface of the water. The cool touch contrasted with the heat of the air, sending a gentle shiver up his arm. The water curled around his fingers, pulling them softly with the current before letting them go. He lifted his hand and watched droplets fall back, each one returning home to its quiet place. In this moment he felt deeply connected not just to the river, but to time, to history, to the quiet continuum of human lives lived along these banks. He felt part of something steady and enduring. The sun shifted again, casting a warm glow across his shoulders. His eyelids softened. He rested back once more, letting the rhythmic motion of the boat lull him into a light meditative haze. He was not asleep, but drifting just beneath full consciousness, where thoughts moved like fish beneath the surface. Present, quiet, unhurried. In this half-dreaming state, he saw visions, not of the past nor the future, but simple, peaceful fragments. The silhouette of his grandfather standing at the riverbank, the feel of muddy soil between his toes as a boy, the glimmer of moonlight on the water during a night long gone, the gentle sway of a lantern in the breeze. None of these images demanded anything of him. They simply floated through his mind, reminding him of who he was and where he came from. The river rocked him gently. The world hummed softly. The line between awareness and rest blurred, warm and inviting. His breathing deepened. His shoulders softened. His thoughts settled like silt, drifting to the riverbed. A faint tug came from the rope, the first firm sign that the net below was beginning to grow heavy. The fizzer shifted slightly, acknowledging the pull, but he did not rise just yet. He let the weight settle. Let the river finish its quiet work. It was almost time, but not quite. For now, he remained in the heart of his reflection, held by the river's ease, by the warmth of the day, by the soft, endless hum of his own quiet thoughts. Dusk on the water as the sun began its slow descent toward the western horizon. The Nile transformed once more. The golden light that had sparkled fiercely across the water throughout the day softened into deeper use amber, rose, and quiet, bruised lavender. The air cooled with a gentle sigh, as though the river itself exhaled after a long, warm afternoon. Dusk was arriving, not suddenly, but with a patient elegance that matched the day's quiet rhythm. The fisherman felt the shift, almost before seeing it. His senses, attuned to the river's moods, noticed the subtle drop in temperature, the lengthening shadows, the slow retreat of daytime animals into the thicker reeds. It was the kind of change that moves softly through the world, like a whisper spreading from one shore to the other. He adjusted his posture slightly, sitting taller in his boat. The rope tied to his net tugged again, this time with more certainty. Beneath the surface, the day's patient waiting had begun to yield its gentle reward. But still, he did not rush. The river always deserved one last moment of quiet gratitude before the work of lifting began. The storyteller's voice settles over the scene like warm dusk air. Evening on the Nile is not an ending. It is a soft turning, a gentle folding of the day into night. Birds began their twilight chorus, their calls echoing over the water in low, mellow tones. The fisherman watched as a heron lifted itself gracefully from the shallows. Its wide wings caught the last rays of the sun, glowing faintly before it disappeared into the dimming sky. Farther downstream, a small flock of ducks gathered in loose formation, murmuring softly as they navigated toward the safety of the reed beds. The sky deepened into a rich gradient soft peach near the horizon, drifting upward into deeper shades of violet. Wisps of clouds glowed briefly in the fading light, painted as though by the hand of an artist who preferred understated beauty. The fisherman found himself staring upward, drawn to the stillness of the sky as much as the river below. Dusk always held a special quiet. Not the stillness of early morning, which felt like a world waiting to awaken, but the stillness of evening, where the world settled with a gentle acceptance. He took a slow breath, feeling the coolness of the air fill his lungs. The warmth of the day still clung to his skin, but it mingled now with a soft, refreshing breeze that lifted from the river's surface. He could smell distant cooking fires from unseen homes along the banquet smoke, simmering lentils, freshly baked flatbread. These scents traveled lightly across the water, comforting in their familiarity. He tightened his hand gently around the rope securing the net. The tug came again steady, present. It was time, but before pulling, he bowed his head slightly, offering the small moment of thanks his father had taught him. For the river, for the food it offered, for the patience it taught. With slow, steady movements, he began to lift the net. The water resisted slightly at first, then yielded, letting the woven fibers rise through the surface with a sound like whispering silk. Droplets fell from the net in glimmering arcs, catching the last light of the day before falling back into the Nile. The fisherman pulled with calm, practiced strength. The net emerged heavy with the weight of the river's abundance. A few fish flickered silver in the dimming light, their bodies shimmering like small twilight stars. He lowered the catch gently into the bottom of the boat, arranging the fish with care. There was no triumph or boastfulness in his movements, only gratitude. This was the way of the Nile. Steady efforts rewarded by steady gifts. No rush, no force, only the quiet exchange between river and fisher. Once the net was secured again, he let it rest beside him, then leaned back slightly to savor the deepening colors around him. The day had softened into a glowing edge of evening. The water reflected the sky with a painter's precision lavender, gold, and the early hints of nighttime blue. At the far bank, the reeds darkened into silhouettes, their shapes bending softly in the cool breeze. The sand glowed faintly, warmed by the day's heat. The trees seemed almost motionless now, their branches heavy with the stillness of dusk. A soft splash broke the quiet of fish jumping near the boat, catching an insect in midair before dropping back beneath the surface. Ripples spread outward, merging with the natural rhythm of the river. The fisherman watched them fade, feeling himself slipping into a deeper ease. The storyteller's voice hums low, comforting. The river prepares for night in slow, thoughtful steps. It dims its colors. It hushes its sounds. It invites everything upon its surface to rest. The fisherman dipped his fingers into the water one last time, feeling the subtle chill that signaled the cooling of the day. The surface carried the touch of evening, smoother now, almost glass-like. He closed his eyes briefly, allowing the sensation to ground him. When he opened them, the first star had appeared, faint but steady, clinging to the edge of the darkening sky. It was soon joined by another, then another. They reflected in the water as small pinpoints of light, trembling slightly with each movement of the river. He loved this time of day, the moment when the boundaries between sky and water seemed to blur, when the world grew soft around the edges, when the river felt like a pathway not just through land, but through time. He reached for his oar. With slow movements, he pushed the boat into motion, guiding it gently across the fading colors of the river. The water parted quietly beneath the hull. Each stroke of the oar was measured, unhurried, letting the current carry him as much as his own strength. The sky deepened further into indigo. The first hints of night embraced the world. The breeze, once warm, carried a cooler whisper. The fisherman steered toward the bank, where a small inlet waited, familiar and welcoming. The reeds parted as the boat approached, brushing softly against the wooden sides. He maneuvered the vessel with the same ease he had known since childhood. When he reached the bank, he stepped onto the sand with a gentle firmness. His feet pressed into the warm grains, grounding him in the quiet of the evening. He secured the boat with a simple knot around a wooden post, another ritual, practiced and respectful. Turning back toward the river, he paused. The water had darkened now, the colors fading into a soft, velvety blue. Thin ribbons of gold clung to the last reflections of the sun. The stars shimmered faintly on the surface. The river breathed, slow and deep, its day folding peacefully into night. The fisher stood for one more moment, letting the quiet settle around him. The day's work was done. The river had spoken, and dusk, gentle, steady, ancient, wrapped itself around the world like a comforting shawl. The river's nighttime lullaby. Night settled upon the Nile in a gradual, graceful descent, like a long curtain of deep blue being lowered across the sky. The last traces of daylight faded into soft lavender, then into hues of gentle indigo, and finally into a velvety darkness that carried its own quiet warmth. The fisherman, having secured his catch and steadied his boat, lingered on the riverbank for a moment, watching as the world around him shifted into its nighttime rhythm. The air felt cooler now, smoothing the warmth left behind by the day. A faint breeze stirred the tops of the reeds, creating a delicate rustle that sounded almost like whispered words. Crickets began their steady chorus, filling the edges of the night with a soft, rhythmic hum. Farther along the bank, a frog croaked deeply, its voice echoing across the still water. The sounds blended seamlessly into one another, forming the first notes of the river's nighttime lullaby. The fisherman stepped back into the boat, not to continue working, but simply to sit, letting the river rock him gently beneath the rising stars. The boat shifted softly, carried by the faintest of currents. No wind pushed it. No hand guided it. The Nile itself cradled him, as if inviting him to rest a little longer. The storyteller's voice enters like a quiet murmur wrapped in moonlight. When the river sings its nighttime song, it asks nothing of you. It simply invites you to breathe, to soften, to drift with it into calm. Above him, the stars multiplied. Their reflections trembled lightly upon the water, creating the illusion of distant lanterns swaying beneath the surface. The fisherman gazed upward, his eyes tracing the delicate patterns of constellations, designs as old as the river itself. Ancient Egyptians once read their stories in these very stars, believing they held guidance from gods and ancestors alike. He wondered, sometimes, what stories his own ancestors might have seen in them. Where they too leaned back in their boats at night, listening to the quiet, feeling the weight of the day dissolve into the vastness overhead. Whether they too felt humbled by the sky's endless reach and comforted by the river's steady presence. A thin crescent moon drifted into sight, its pale glow shimmering across the water in a long, wavering ribbon. The fisherman watched as the moonlight stretched slowly toward the boat, as if reaching out a gentle hand. The reflection danced softly with each movement of the current, flickering but never breaking. He dipped his fingers into the cool water. The chill startled him at first, but quickly gave way to a soothing calm. Beneath the surface, the river moved with a quiet certainty, carrying the secrets of the day downstream. His fingers traced small circles, and the water responded with ripples that spread outward, glimmering under the moon's silvery glow. He remembered his father's voice, deep and warm, speaking to him when he was a child. The river at night is a different teacher. In the day, it shows you what moves. At night, it shows you what rests. Tonight, everything seemed wrapped in rest. Even the animals that remained awake moved with purpose, softened by darkness. A night heron glided silently across the river, its wings cutting through the air without a sound. Its silhouette drifted past the moon, leaving a brief, elegant shadow before fading into the reeds. The fisherman closed his eyes for a moment, letting the river's sound sink deeper into his body. The rhythmic hum of crickets, The soft bubbling of water against the hull, the distant splash of a large fish settling into deeper currents. Each sound felt familiar, comforting, like a lullaby sung not by a single voice, but by the world itself. He breathed in deeply, held at least. The river breathed with him. The night air carried scents that didn't rise in the day. The earthy musk of wet reeds, the faint sweetness of wildflowers opening under moonlight, the distant trace of wood smoke drifting from a nearby village. These smells mingled in the cool air, layering over one another in a subdued harmony. The fisherman leaned back slightly, resting both hands against the wood of the boat. The boards felt different at night, cooler, smoother, almost silken. Each creak of the hull sounded softer, gentler, as though the boat itself understood the need for quiet. He watched the slow drift of stars reflected in the water. Their soft trembling made the sky appear deeper, endless. As a boy, he'd once asked his grandfather why stars shimmered more brightly on the river than anywhere else. His grandfather had smiled and said, "Because water remembers light longer than the sky does." Tonight, he understood that in a new way. The water did hold the light, held it and returned it, held the day's warmth, the sky's glow, the memories of countless mornings, and now held the stars, trembling softly with each ripple. The fisherman exhaled slowly, feeling an easy heaviness spread through his limbs. Not a heaviness of fatigue, but the kind that comes when the body begins to settle fully into rest. His eyelids soft, his breathing deepened, his thoughts loosened like threads gently unwinding in the quiet. The storyteller's voice returns in a murmur. Night on the Nile is a cradle, a place where the world softens its edges and invites every weary spirit to drift. He thought of the stories his grandmother told him, the ones about river spirits who walked along the water at night, guiding travelers, soothing the lonely, carrying messages between worlds. Whether he believed the tales literally didn't matter. He felt their truth in moments like this, when the world seemed held by something gentle, unseen, ancient. A faint splash echoed from the far side of the river. Perhaps a crocodile settling its heavy body into deeper water, or a large fish cutting sharply beneath the surface. The sound did not disturb him. It felt natural, part of the river's nighttime conversation. The air cooled further. The fisherman pulled the cloth around his shoulders, letting its weight settle comfortably. He gazed at the moon again now, climbing higher, shining more brightly. He felt as though the river were singing to him through its shimmering silver trails. The net rested quietly in the boat. The fish lay still. The work was done. All that remained was this moment, this night, this river, this soft lullaby, carrying him gently toward the final quiet of the day. He rested one hand against the side of the boat and closed his eyes fully. The river rocked him. The air caressed him. The night soothed him. And in that softness between wakefulness and dreaming, he felt himself drifting, not away from the world, but deeper into its calm. Farewell from the eternal river. Night had fully claimed the Nile now, wrapping the river in a blanket of deep blue and soft silver. The moon floated high above, like a quiet guardian, casting its shimmering path across the water in long, trembling ribbons. Stars multiplied in the darkness overhead, spreading in clusters and gentle streaks, as if the sky itself was a vast tapestry woven with threads of light. The fisherman sat in his boat, still as stone, warm in his blankets, held by the subtle rocking of the current. The day had been long, filled with patient waiting and gentle lessons. But now the river had settled into its softest mood, a mood reserved only for those who lingered after dusk, those who moved slowly, those willing to simply be. The world around him was silent, but not empty. It was the kind of silence that felt full of breath, full of memory, full of presence. He watched the moonlight ripple across the water, bending and stretching with each soft movement of the current. The light touched the reeds, turning them into thin, trembling silhouettes. It glided across the sandbanks, making them glow faintly. It brushed the surface of the boat, giving the wood a faint, silvery sheen. Everywhere the light landed, it softened the edges of the world. The fisherman knew this moment well. It was the moment before returning home, the moment before stepping back into the world of walls, voices, and tasks. But before he left, he always sat here, always listened, always offered one last breath of quiet gratitude. The storyteller's voice enters gently, like a final whisper before sleep. The river asks nothing of you, but when you give it your stillness, it returns peace. When you give it your presence, it returns clarity. When you give it your patience, it returns grace. He inhaled deeply, the cool night air filling his lungs with a calm that felt ancient, as though drawn not from the present moment, but from the memory of countless nights before this one. The scent of the river was different at night, deeper, richer, touched by the faint sweetness of night-blooming flowers and the mineral breath of cooling stone. He let the air out slowly, let his shoulders soften, let the river's rhythm settle into his body one last time. He thought of the generations who had come before him, his father, his grandfather, the countless ancestors whose names were lost to time, but whose presence still lived in the curve of the net he used, the way he tied his knots, the quiet rituals he performed without thinking. They had all known this river. They had all heard this same nighttime lullaby. The fisherman dipped his hand into the water, letting the cool river glide between his fingers. He swirled his hand gently, creating soft circles of movement that spread across the surface. The ripples glowed faintly in the moonlight, then dissolved into the wider motion of the current. He whispered a soft farewell under his breath, not words, not a prayer, just a simple exhale shaped with intention. The river accepted it, carrying it quietly downstream, folding it into the endless journey toward the sea. He reached for the rope tying his boat to the wooden post and tugged it slightly to ensure it was secure for the night. The knot held firm. Tomorrow morning, he would return, as he always did. But tonight, the river did not need his work only. His presence. As he stood up slowly, his body swayed gently with the boat. He steadied himself, then stepped onto the warm sand. The ground felt comforting, familiar beneath his bare feet. He took a moment to stretch, feeling the day's stillness ease from his muscles. He turned back to look at the river one more time. The water lay quiet now, moving with the slow breath of night. The stars reflected on its surface created the illusion of a sky beneath the boat, an upside-down world, where constellations drifted softly with the current. He had always loved this sight. It made him feel small in the best possible way. He thought of how many nights like this he had seen, how many more he would see, and how many his ancestors had witnessed long before he was born. The Nile flowed gently, carrying the weight of countless memories, countless lives. And yet, it never seemed burdened. It moved without haste, without regret, without resistance. Its journey was long, but it never questioned its path. It simply flowed, trusting time, trusting the land, trusting itself. The fisherman felt a quiet admiration settle in his chest. The river had taught him much over the years, but perhaps its greatest lesson was this: to move through life calmly, steady, unhurried, certain of one's purpose, yet gentle in every step. He took a few steps up the bank, sand shifting under his feet. A small lantern flickered in the distance, the soft glow from his home, waiting quietly for his return. The sight brought warmth to his chest. He thought of his family gathered inside, perhaps preparing a simple meal, perhaps sitting together in comfortable silence. He looked at the river again. The storyteller's voice settles like the final note of a lullaby. Good night, gentle Nile. Good night to your currents and your secrets. Good night to the memories you hold within your depths. Good night to the stillness you offer to those who listen. The fisherman bowed his head slightly, not a grand gesture, just a humble acknowledgement of the river's presence. Then he turned toward the path, leading home. Behind him, the Nile continued its quiet journey, carrying moonlight and starlight across its surface, whispering softly to the reeds, brushing gently against the sandbanks, humming its ancient song through the heart of the night. As the fisherman walked home, the lullaby followed him. Soft, steady, enduring. A companion for his steps, a comfort for his spirit, a farewell from the eternal river. As night settles over the Nile and the fisherman heads home, may the river's calm follow you into your dreams. May its moonlit currents carry away the noise of the day, and may its ancient stillness cradle you through the night. If you enjoyed this journey, I'd be grateful for a small like or a quiet comment. It helps our sleepy stories reach more wanderers in need of rest. Until next time, sleep well, dream gently, and may the calm of the Nile stay with you long after you close your eyes.